There is an ancient question that has haunted the human race since the very first moment we looked up at the stars and dared to wonder about our own existence. It is not the question of where we come from, nor is it the question of where we are going. The most terrifying question, the one that has driven philosophers into madness and caused kings to lie awake in cold sweats, is simply this: who am I? It sounds simple, but think about it deeply. We spend our entire lives hiding behind masks. You are a dutiful son or daughter. You are an exemplary employee. You are a loving partner. We build elaborate fortresses made of reputation, money, social status, and relationships to define who we are. But imagine, for just 1 second, if all of that was stripped away. Imagine if you were taken from your life and thrown into a completely empty room. No internet, no books, no family, no friends to talk to. And imagine you were locked in that room, not for a day, but for 6 months, 12 months, or even 18 months. In that deafening silence, when the outer shell of your identity begins to peel away, what would remain? Who would you meet in that darkness? Would you find a saint? Or would you find a monster screaming in the void? Today, we are not talking about a trivial book of magic tricks. We are not discussing how to find treasure or gain power over others. We are looking at a psychological map, perhaps the most dangerous user manual ever written for the human mind. It is called the Book of Abramelin. For over 600 years, this book has lain dormant in dusty libraries, whispered about by secret societies. People say it can help you command demons or perform miracles, but those are lies designed for the greedy. The truth about Abramelin is much more brutal. It is a machine designed to crush the ego. It promises to introduce you to your guardian angel, but the price is that you must destroy who you used to be. And believe me, your old self will not die quietly. It will kick and scream and drag every one of your worst nightmares out of the dark to stop you. To understand the heavy weight of this book, we must go back in time to 14th century Europe, a time of darkness, plague, and religious confusion. To truly grasp the motivation behind this text, you have to understand the fear that permeated the air in the year 1398. The Black Death had already ravaged the continent, wiping out 1/3 of the population, and people were looking for someone to blame. As was often the case in history, the blame fell upon the Jewish communities. Abraham of Worms, the author of this text, was a Jewish scholar living in Germany during this fragile and violent time. He was not a crazy wizard living in a fantasy tower. He was a man living in constant danger, watching his people suffer, feeling the walls closing in. He sought power not for the sake of vanity, but for survival and understanding. He wanted to know why God allowed such suffering. He wanted to know if there was a way to contact the divine directly, without the interference of corrupt priests or confusing dogma.
Driven by this desperation, Abraham spent years traveling across Europe. He visited the great cities, seeking out alchemists who claimed they could turn lead into gold, and Kabbalists who claimed to know the numerology of the universe. But everywhere he went, he found disappointment. He found men who were blind trying to lead the blind. He found greed masquerading as spirituality. He saw charlatans selling fake hope to the desperate. He was on the verge of giving up, his faith in the divine hanging by a thread, convinced that perhaps the heavens were empty and silent. But destiny led him to Egypt. In his handwritten notes, Abraham tells us that he traveled along the Nile River, leaving the safety of civilization behind. He went to a remote, desolate town called Araki. It was there, in the quiet solitude of the desert, that he met an old hermit living in a cave. The hermit's name was Abramelin. Unlike the flashy magicians in Europe who demanded gold coins before speaking a word, Abramelin asked for nothing. He lived a life of extreme simplicity. He wore no fancy robes embroidered with silver. He had no grand altar. Yet Abraham wrote that in the old man's eyes there was a strange, piercing peace, the kind of light that exists only in someone who has seen through the fabric of reality. Abramelin saw that Abraham was sincere, that his heart was heavy not with greed, but with a genuine thirst for truth. So the old man agreed to teach him the sacred magic. But he gave a serious warning, a warning that echoes down to us through the centuries. He said that this path is not for the weak, and it is certainly not for the curious. He told him that once you begin, you must not stop, because if you quit halfway, madness will be your only companion for the rest of your life. This was not a threat, it was a statement of fact, like saying if you jump off a cliff, you will fall. Abraham stayed in the desert. He learned the system. He memorized the prayers. He understood the architecture of the Spirit. Eventually, he carried this knowledge back to Germany. He transcribed the entire process into a series of books written as a legacy for his second son, Lamech. The introduction to the book reads like a last will and testament. He tells his son, "I leave you not gold and silver, for those can be stolen by thieves or seized by kings. I leave you the method to master yourself, a treasure that no power on earth can take from you." This sets the tone for everything that follows. This is not a book of spells to get rich, it is a book of transformation. So, what is this method? Before we explain the ritual, we need to fix a big misunderstanding. When you hear holy guardian angel, your brain probably imagines a winged creature playing a harp on a cloud. Forget that image. In this book, the angel is not a separate being that flies down from heaven to save you. It is a concept much deeper than that. Imagine your mind is like a house with many floors. The basement is where your animal instincts live, your fear, your lust, your survival drive. This is the part of you that reacts without thinking. The ground floor is your personality, the mask you wear every day to interact with society. It is the you that has a name and a job title. But on the top floor, locked away in the attic where the windows are always open to the sunlight, there is a part of you that is pure consciousness. This is the part of you that knows absolute right from absolute wrong. It is the part that is not afraid of death because it understands eternity. It is the best version of your soul, the divine spark. The book calls this the Holy Guardian Angel. The goal of the book is not to summon a ghost to do your chores. The goal is to shatter the floorboards between the attic and the basement. The goal is to connect your everyday personality with this higher divine self. The philosophy of Abramelin argues that human beings are suffering because we are fractured. We are in a state of civil war. One part of us wants to be good, the other wants to be bad. One part wants to create, the other wants to destroy. This internal conflict bleeds us dry. It consumes our life force. Meeting the angel means ending the war. It means achieving a state of knowledge and conversation, where your will becomes aligned with the will of the universe. You no longer doubt, you no longer regret, you become a singular force of nature. But, as the book implies, you cannot invite a king into a dirty house. To meet this perfect version of yourself, you have to clean your mind. And that cleaning process is the nightmare. The ritual of Abramelin is not something you do on a weekend. It requires a commitment of time that seems impossible in our modern world. It takes anywhere from 6 to 18 months. It is, for all intents and purposes, a voluntary prison sentence. The book is incredibly specific about the physical requirements. You can't just do this in your bedroom. You must prepare an oratory.
This must be a clean room, preferably with a window opening to the east towards the rising sun. The floor must be made of pine or cedar wood, scrubbed clean so that no dirt remains. You must construct an altar. You must sew a robe of white linen and another of red silk. You must prepare a special oil, known as Abramelin oil, made from myrrh, cinnamon, and galanja. Every sensory detail is designed to trigger a psychological shift. The smell of the oil, the feel of the linen, the sight of the rising sun, everything signals to your brain that you are leaving the mundane world behind. The process is divided into 3 phases, and the intensity ratchets up like a tightening noose. In the first 2 months, the first term, you can still live a somewhat normal life. You can go to work, you can speak to neighbors, but the withdrawal begins. You must reduce your business dealings. You must cut out the noise. No gossip, no drinking, no frivolous entertainment. Every morning before the sun breaks the horizon, you must wash your hands and face, kneel in your oratory, and recite a specific prayer. You do not pray for money. You do not pray for love. You pray only for clarity. You pray for the strength to be purified. You are beginning to tell your ego that it is no longer in charge.
Then, in the second phase, the pressure gets higher. The book demands that you isolate yourself further. You start pulling away from your friends and extended family. You're instructed to be chaste, meaning sexual activity must cease. Your diet becomes bland, eating only to sustain life, never for pleasure. You are starving the beast of the senses. You spend more time in the oratory, praying in the morning and at sunset. The feeling of being watched begins to creep in. The silence in the house grows heavier. Without the distractions of social validation, without the dopamine hits of everyday pleasures, your mind begins to look for something to hold on to, but there is nothing there. Finally, the third phase arrives. This is the hardest part. You cut off all contact with the outside world. No news, no letters, no human voices, just you and 4 walls. You must walk barefoot in the oratory. You enter the room 2 or 3 times a day. You have to understand that humans are social animals. We define our existence through the reflection in the eyes of others. We know we are funny because people laugh. We know we are smart because people nod. When you remove everyone else, the mirror breaks. Your ego begins to panic. It is like a spoiled child left alone in the dark forest. In that silence, time starts to distort. An hour feels like a century. You can hear your own heart beating like a war drum. And when the noise outside stops, the noise inside begins to scream. This is when the book stops being a manual and becomes a mirror of ruthless truth. The famous psychologist Carl Jung talked about the shadow, the dark side of our personality that we try to hide, the repository of our guilt, shame, and aggression. The Abramelin ritual forces you to meet your shadow face to face. When you are alone for that long, your brain starts to rebel against the lack of stimulation. People who have tried this and failed report terrible things. They don't see monsters jumping out of the closet. They see the monsters of their own history. First, the memories come back. Painful memories you thought you had buried deeply. The shame of a lie you told 10 years ago. The guilt of hurting someone who loved you. The humiliation of a childhood failure. They all come back, vivid and visceral. You cannot distract yourself with a phone or TV. You have to sit there on the wooden floor and watch the movie of your own failures on repeat. You are forced to relive every moment where you were cowardly, cruel, or weak. Then come the hallucinations. Your brain, desperate for input, starts to manufacture reality. You might see shadows stretching across the wall. You might hear whispers in the corners of the room. Paranoia sets in. A voice in your head starts to tell you that you are insane, that you have wasted your life, that you are nothing. This is the dark night of the soul. This is the breaking point. Many people quit at this stage. They run out of the oratory, fleeing back into the arms of the world, diving into alcohol or obsession to numb the pain they just unearthed. And as the old hermit warned, these people are often ruined. They have woken up the dragons in the basement, but lacked the strength to tame them. Now, those dragons run loose, haunting their dreams forever.
But what if you stay? What if you kneel on that floor, tears streaming down your face, shaking with fear, and you refuse to move? What if you let the storm rage, let the shadow scream, and you simply watch it without judging it? If you endure, there comes a moment, a singular point in time, the breakthrough. The screaming of the ego suddenly runs out of breath, the noise stops, the exhaustion creates a vacuum, and in that absolute stillness, the light enters. It is described not as a visual hallucination, but as a feeling of total, crushing love and clarity. The barrier between you and the divine dissolves. You understand your purpose. You understand that you are not the small, fearful person you thought you were. You are connected to everything. This is the meeting with the holy guardian angel. It is a rebirth. After this connection is made, and only after you are fortified by this new holy strength, the book tells you to do the thing everyone is curious about. Summon the demons. But wait, why? If you have already found peace, if you are already enlightened, why would you want to drag yourself back down into the filth of the demonic? This is the most brilliant and misunderstood part of the Abramelin system. It is not about destroying the darkness. It is about integrating it. In the cosmology of this book, demons represent the chaotic, raw, undirected forces of nature and of the human subconscious. They represent things like greed, anger, lust, and ambition. If you kill these parts of yourself, you become a vegetable. A person with no ambition, no drive, and no desire cannot change the world. A saint who sits in a cave does not help anyone. The goal is not to kill the beast. The goal is to put a saddle on the beast. You need the energy of the demon, but you need it guided by the wisdom of the angel. The ritual describes summoning the 4 great kings of hell: Lucifer, Leviathan, Satan, and Belial. These names carry heavy religious baggage, but in this context, think of them as elemental forces. Lucifer is the air, the intellect, the pride. Leviathan is the water, the deep emotional subconscious. Satan is the fire, the burning wrath and energy. Belial is the earth, the material world and stability. Following them are hundreds of dukes and princes with strange names like Paimon, Orions, and Eraton. The practitioner, now glowing with the authority of their angel, stands in the center of the room. They do not beg. They do not trade their soul. They do not offer blood sacrifices. They command. You look at the demon of greed and you bind it. You say, "You will no longer control me. You will work for me. You will turn this raw hunger for more into the drive to build an empire for the good of others." You look at the demon of lust and you bind it. You say, "You will turn this carnal obsession into creative energy and passion for art." When the demons submit, they swear an oath of allegiance. They recognize that you are now the master of the house. This is the ultimate metaphor for maturity. A child is controlled by their impulses. A master controls their impulses and uses them as fuel. To seal this pact, the book provides a system of magic squares. These are grids of letters that look like crossword puzzles or palindromes. For example, a square might read Milan in one direction and
irago in another. These are not just random letters, they are codes. In the Kabbalistic tradition, letters are numbers, and numbers are the building blocks of reality. By meditating on these squares, the magician is said to be able to program reality. There are squares to find gold, squares to cure sickness, squares to cause discord among enemies, and even squares to fly or walk underwater. But history has shown that these squares are dangerous. They are like loaded guns. If a person tries to use the squares without doing the 18 months of cleaning first, the gun backfires. The demons do not obey a weak master. There is no greater example of this failure than the tragic story of Aleister Crowley. Crowley was perhaps the most famous and controversial occultist of the 20th century, a man who called himself the Beast 666. In 1899, when he was young, arrogant, and hungry for power, he decided to perform the Abramelin operation. He searched for the perfect location and found Boleskine House, a secluded manor on the gloomy, mist-covered shores of Loch Ness in Scotland. The house was perfect. It was isolated, it faced the right direction, and it had a dark atmosphere that appealed to him. Crowley moved in and began the preparations. He built the oratory. He scattered fine river sand on the terrace to create a magic circle. He began the months of prayer and fasting. But Crowley was a flawed vessel. He was brilliant, but he was also an addict, a narcissist, and deeply impatient. As he progressed through the ritual, the phenomena began. The local people in the nearby village started to whisper. They said the house was shrouded in a dark cloud even on sunny days. They said the sounds of wild animals echoed from the property at night. Crowley's own servants began to lose their minds. A lodgekeeper, a man who had been sober for years, suddenly went mad with drink and attempted to murder his wife and children. Another workman simply vanished. The atmosphere at Boleskine became poisonous. Just as the operation was reaching its climax, the moment when the demons were beginning to gather, scratching at the thin veil of reality, Crowley received a letter. It was from the Golden Dawn, the magical order he belonged to in London. There was a political schism happening, a battle for leadership. Crowley, driven by his ego and his desire for rank, decided to abandon the ritual. He packed his bags and left for London to fight his petty battles. This was a catastrophic mistake. He left the door open. He had called the spirits up. He had agitated the hornet's nest, but he had not finished the job of binding them. He did not introduce them to the angel. He simply left them there, unsupervised. The consequences rippled out for decades. Crowley's life became a downward spiral of heroin addiction, sexual depravity, and financial ruin. He died penniless and alone. But the house suffered too. Boleskine House became known as one of the most cursed places in Scotland. Decades later, Jimmy Page, the guitarist for the rock band Led Zeppelin, bought the house because he was fascinated by Crowley. But he rarely stayed there, citing the bad vibes. Tragedy continued to stalk the grounds. Suicides occurred. Madness seemed to infect anyone who lived there for too long. And finally, in recent years, fire after fire has reduced the manor to a blackened shell, as if the very earth is trying to reject what happened there. Crowley's story is a stark warning. You cannot cheat the work. The universe does not accept shortcuts. If you try to command the darkness before you have conquered yourself, the darkness will eat you alive.